Welcome back to the Remothering Masterclass. You're seeing some giggles because right before we hit record, I always get just a little bit nervous. But hi, I'm your host, Simona. My full name is Simona Vivi Haji Georgelis, and I'm the founder of remothering.org, which is where you can go to find the full agenda for the masterclass. And today I am with Kate Holston. And Kate is, I love the name of your business, The Energy Gardener. So that's going to be my very first question, is to ask you about that. Kate is a hypnotherapist. She's an energy intuitive coach, and she specializes in working with empaths and HSPs, highly sensitive people. But you do not need to be an empath or an HSP to benefit from today's talk, which is about shifting perspective. And we'll go into more detail about what that's going to be in just a moment. But right now, just Kate, thank you so much for joining us. It's really, I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you for inviting me. It's absolute pleasure. And yeah, I feel very connected with you energetically right now. I think we're going to light some magic right now, hopefully.
I hope so. I hope so. That's funny, actually, a little behind the scenes for folks. Sometimes, and not all the time, before I get on the call with a speaker, I'll light a candle to create like a space of healing and invite in just good wishes for everybody listening. And now we're going to expose a little bit of my back. So and sometimes I also will pull like a card or a message. And so the message that I pulled today is the Queen of Fire.
Oh gosh, that's me.
And the Queen of Fire message is about creative collaborations, soul connections, passion inspired by spirit. And it just, I co-create with others dedicated to a vision of achieving the highest good for all. How might I join in the dance of co-creation, letting spirit flow through me and inspire me to express my passion? So that is what is holding the space. So when you said we feel energy, feel energetically connected,
That's interesting. I have a lot of fire energy naturally. So that's really interesting that you pulled that. Lots of alchemy. So, okay.
Yeah. So, but before we dive into the first question, I love the name of your website and your Instagram handle, The Energy Gardener. Can you give us a little bit of a background about what that's about? And that will also help us get to know you a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. It's what, as with a lot of things, you know, when we're starting a business and we're trying to figure out a title, a container around it. It was something that literally came to me. I use a lot of analogy in my work, a lot of visual analogy. I'm a very visual person, and gardening is just the most wonderful analogy for what we do, what we're doing in a healing journey, particularly in the healing journey that we're on in remothering, because we have some weeds to pull out to create space in our life, so that we can actually choose what to grow in their place. And that's really what the energy gardener means, meaning that you're gathering and you're exploring and you're observing what's there that you don't want there. I mean, just think about a weed. A weed is actually something that's in a place where we don't necessarily want it, because we want to decide what we want to grow in that place. But weeds in and of themselves are not bad things. They're actually very medicinal as well. Most weeds are, aren't they? So there's lots and lots of layers to it, because these things that we're pulling out that we think are bad or in the wrong place or redundant, actually we have use for that. There is a very medicinal use for what we pull out along the way. So it's very layered, and it just
is very layered. And such a powerful thought. Thank you for that. I'm sitting here and thinking about, as soon as you just said that, like because of some of I have some digestive challenges. And so dandelion leaves is just
Yeah.
something that is just a regular part of my diet. And yeah, as soon as you said that, I thought, wow, there you go.
Yeah.
So weed
Yeah.
that I wouldn't want in my vegetable garden, but it is certainly a weed that is part of my health protocol. So
Yeah, and it's really helpful for us to actually study weeds as well, in terms of not only how medicinal are, but how intentional they are in nature to allow cycles of growth. For example, dandelions are the bees' first food of the season, for example.
mm,
And it's the same in with our wounds. They are very intentional as part of a growth cycle, but while we're carrying them, we don't necessarily feel that, see that, and understand that. When we've got to the end of that journey, or towards further on in that journey, and we look back, we actually do see just how intentional all of that was. So yeah, so it fits with
it
my work quite well.
it sure does. Thank you for sharing that. And now I was so focused on what you were saying. I want to just take a peek at my first question for you. Although you actually hit on it a little bit, even in your description of energy gardener, which is, since today our focus is on learning how to evolve our perspective, how do we evolve our perspective? Can we go straight in with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so our perspective is very clearly the way that we look at the world, the way that we perceive the world. It is the lens through which we view the world, in terms of who we are as a part of the world and what life is for us, what's available to us in life. That's our perspective. Now, what's really interesting about perspective is we know we all have a very different perspective. We know this from eyewitness testimony, for example. One thing happens in front of a dozen people, and then you interview each person, they will tell you something wildly different, because everything we see, everything we experience through our senses, all comes through that perspective. And why that perspective is so different for all of us is because it's all shaped by the development of our mind through our experiences. And particularly, it's shaped by what I call the 4 levels of mind. And in my work, this is what I work with, the 4 levels of the mind. And these levels being, and there are lots of different ways that these levels are defined in literature, in scientific literature, although it's not that widely studied in scientific literature, but a lot of psychological literature. Some of these terms are interchangeable, but in terms of how I use the terms that I use and how I address the 4 levels of mind, it's the unconscious mind, which is the vault. And I'll speak more about that in a moment. The subconscious mind, which holds the programming. It's the computer coding which runs the mind. Then we have the conscious thinking mind, and that is shaped by everything underneath it. The conscious thinking mind is shaped by the perspective, because we'll only see what we know to be true and what we know who we feel we are and how we feel we are available to orient in the world.
Which
And
makes so much sense when we think about, and in week 1, we were talking to Jules Taylor Short, and she's talking about the speed. And this is Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain. So brainstem, like limbic, neocortex. And so this is so much faster. And so less information gets all the way up here. So it makes sense what you're saying, which is, if this is taking in so much more information because it's so much faster, what it chooses to feed up here will be shaped, if I'm getting this right, by our experiences and our lens. Is that fair to
absolutely,
summarize what you just said?
absolutely. And I'll go into these a little more. But the fourth level is the higher mind, and we'll talk about that right at the end. But if we start with the unconscious, that's
Yeah.
the
And
part
now
of
I'm
our
taking
life.
notes.
Yeah.
Even though
So if we start with the unconscious mind, that is the part of our mind that develops first when we land on the planet. Even it's developing when we're in the womb. So it's that very first part. It's that sponge state that we're all in. And we're in that sponge state because we need to learn very quickly about the environment that we're going to emerge into. And we need to know how to keep ourselves safe in the world right from the get-go. So this is why the unconscious mind develops first. And it's the vault. It is the part of us which holds very important information to us, because it needs to keep information here that's going to keep us physically safe in the world. It holds our fears and our trauma. It holds all of the things that the most primal part of our mind, so the limbic system, the amygdala, is all connected to this. It's what do I need to never forget to make sure that I stay alive? And our relationship with our primary caregivers is all embedded within that, because of course, when we come into the world, well, even before we come into the world, we're inside our mother. And it's all intertwined with the safety zone that we're going to have, who we need to be, how we need to orient to be safe. It all starts with that first relationship. And so if there's problems with that first relationship, that is going to form so much of our perspective about who we are and what life's going to offer us. And that's all held there in the vault. And it's locked away, far away from our conscious thinking mind. Some of it we will be aware of, but so much of it we won't. And this part of us, it's almost like it's like a 24/7 security camera. That's 360 lens, high definition, Dolby surround sound. It takes in everything all of the time and records it all on the hard drive in case we need to look at it again. And it spots patterns and it's looking for suspicious activity. It's the security guard watching everything to keep us safe. And that is then yeah, and it's flavored by our ongoing experience. And you can see how this does shape our perspective, because the security guard that spotted the suspicious activity zooms in on that and it's just missing everything else. And so this starts to shape and narrow this kind of blank canvas, this wide lens that we're born with. It starts to narrow what we see is available for us in life and who we believe we are by a form of degrees.
It's such a powerful analogy.
Thank you. And so any of our fears that we hold around life, around who we feel we are allowed to be, who we are safe to be, this is all going to be very unconscious to us. And it's all forms the first bricks of our foundation. It's that first layer that goes down. And it makes sense for it to be that way, because we need to be safe in the environment that we emerge into, because the mind's number one priority is to keep us alive. And it's the oldest part of the brain. And because it's also entwined with the limbic system, so it runs the flight and fight, fawn, flop, and friend. It runs all of these stress responses, these very primal responses within us. And it's all done very unconsciously. We're not thinking about it because this is happening way before all of this information's going into the vault, way before the conscious thinking mind's developed, when we get to choose how we respond. So this is all about our basic reactions to life.
Makes so much sense.
It does, but what's really powerful is just to understand how it shapes this perspective of ours right from the get-go.
Sure, yeah. I see that like, especially what I love that metaphor of like the zooming the camera in to be like, okay, what's happening? There's some suspicious activity. Let me get really focused in this narrow space. Real, I'm, I'm following you. I'm with you.
Yeah. So then the next level of the mind is the subconscious mind. And again, these terms are used interchangeably throughout different literature, but I use these tools in this way just to try and distinguish between the two levels.
Yeah.
And this is not the part of the mind necessarily that's the secure, keeping everything secure and safe in terms of our physical safety, but it's still operating around our safety, but it's around how we are safe to form relationships and find our place in the tribe of life, as it were. So this is where all the programming comes into play. So all of the cultural norms that we are taught from an early age, from the ways of being of what's normal for us in our family of origin, what we're taught at school, so how we are taught we need to show up and behave in an educational setting. It's all happening when we're at this very young age. And you know, even the era that we're born into. Yeah, so the era that our parents were born into is very different to the era that we've been born into. On the face of it, it looks the same, but it's not the same. It's very different. There's a lot of different pathways available to us that weren't available to the previous generation, for example. So all of these lighter beliefs are all still happening when our minds, when our personality and that part of our unconscious mind, so the under the surface part of our mind is developing.
And I love the distinction and the way you're defining these words as specifically where we're focusing to keep ourselves safe, and then how we're being programmed within that focus. It's such a helpful distinction to clarify those two as two distinct things. So
Yeah, it's, and even just thinking back to when we were children, we can connect with that feeling within us of needing to find out what's normal and what everybody else is doing so we can fit in. Because as a child, in a very primal way, if you're an outsider, there's consequences for that, and they're not nice consequences when we're children. So it's really important for us to find our place and our role, and never more so than in the home. And at the earlier part of the development of the subconscious mind, and the subconscious mind creates our habits and our behaviors and our patterns and our ways of being in the world, our ways of orienting and our personality. The most powerful place that all of that forms is in the home. It's in the family home. And when we're children, if there are things that we cannot make sense of, things that we're not sure if they are normal, because we're comparing them to, for example, what we're experiencing in the home isn't what we're seeing in the movies, isn't what we're reading in a book, isn't what we're seeing when we go to our friend's house or our cousin's house. When we can't figure out what that difference is, our young developing brain, the subconscious, won't just leave things open to that's a mystery. It won't do that. It needs to find an answer. And when it can't find an answer, unfortunately, what it does is it decides that we're the problem. And so many of us that have grown up in confusing households where things felt very different to everywhere else from all the messaging that we were receiving around us, and we can't figure out why that's happened, why that's different. We go back into that zoom lens again, and we really start to focus on everything that's going on to try and figure it out. But we're doing that as a child with so little of the information, so little understanding, so little life experience. And unfortunately, 9 times out of 10, the conclusion that we come to is it's me.
Which one of our other speakers, and Fraser talks about, and I think it's come up in a couple places, which is that's the most like safe thing to conclude, because then there's control for you to
Yeah,
be better, do better, change something, and it's not just living in this open chaos. There's like, oh, there's a problem and I can do something with it, which because I'm the problem. Or-
absolutely.
So there's, yeah.
And that's when adaptive behaviors come in.
But before we pop to adaptive behaviors, there's a word you're using, and I would love if you could help define it, which is how we orient and what you mean by that. Um, it'd be great.
Yeah, in terms of the direction that life takes us in and where we place our focus and where we develop, which areas we develop in, which pathway we start to walk within, and a lot of that is, well, all of that really is based upon who we believe we are and where we believe life is going to be open to us, open to receiving us, safe for us. It becomes a compass direction that we wouldn't necessarily follow in different circumstances.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and it can take us far away from who we naturally could have developed to be.
Also makes sense.
Yeah.
And then back to what you were talking about in the early piece of it, also our medicine. So, for example, your work with empaths and highly sensitive people, I imagine living in an environment that is confusing like that requires you to hone that muscle of preparedness and reading the people that are in your world to keep things the way that just works for you. So there's that medicine. If I
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's the ability to read a person, but in a split second, to know then how to change yourself, to adapt, to stay safe, to have an easier time of it.
Mm. And now I'm pulling us off of a tangent, but when in that world, that adapt to stay safe, that can turn into adaptation of people pleaser, but that also can build a strength of being able to read a room, being able to read people. It's just so then it's, as I imagine we do this work, it's okay, then how do we take that gift and instead of being adaptation, get to use it because it was hard earned.
Well, at first, we don't see it as a gift necessarily. I remember before I started really my own healing journey, it was just hypervigilance. It was the walking in the room to see who was going to be the person to cause trouble and staying away from them. It wasn't a gift that I developed in a way to benefit my growth as a person until I'd started that healing journey, because it was literally all around all of these things that are my gifts now, were ways to keep me safe. And that's very common for so many of us. And not just physically safe, emotionally safe.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I brought us off. Did you want to say anything more about the subconscious, that programming piece?
Yeah, in terms of the evolving the perspective.
Yeah.
So the unconscious and the subconscious play a huge role in shaping this perspective, because over time, as we start to adapt and we start to learn the role that we need to play at home, the role that we need to play with mom, the role we need to play with dad, the role we need to play with our siblings, the role we play at school, because if things are not easy at home, we have to play a role at school so that the problems don't overlap there. So we learn to have all these develop all these adaptations within our behavior to keep ourselves safe within those parameters that we've learned to be safe within. And what this does is it closes us down in terms of our perspective, in terms of who we believe we are allowed and able to be in life, and which parts of life are available to us as adults. And it closes it, and we don't know it's happening. We don't, it's something that happens by degrees as we develop. And we can become very tunnel vision and very single-sighted when we're older, when we leave the kind of the nest and go out into the world. And because we have this narrow perspective, this is how we end up in similar relationships. And we end up with...
My laughter is not because it's funny. My
because that's all
laughter
we
is because it's a
see.
big piece of emotion that,
Yeah.
yeah.
But we can understand why, because we've learned to look down this zoom lens at people with certain characteristics. So that's what we see. That's who we see. And we don't see everybody else because they're safe, they're not relevant. We don't notice them. We're looking at this all the time. And so we get ourselves into friendships that would play out the same dynamic. I mean, wow, how many years of female friendships did I have where I was unconsciously playing out things that I needed to play out with my mother, but couldn't with her. And it you know, my husband would laugh and say, you know, when I had the kind of the light bulb moment and going, this friendship is really not healthy. I'm now realizing, and he'd seen it, you know, he'd seen it. She's just got into another one and she's acting out all the stuff that she never got to resolve with. But that's what we do. That's what we do. And we can see why we do it, because we've got this closed perspective and this straightforward, this is life, this is our life, and this is who we are. And we operate within that small space, and we're missing out on all of this.
And as we continue to talk, though, are we going to be able to also talk a little bit about how to know? Fantastic.
Yeah.
We'll continue on for the ride.
Yeah. And so this is taking on the journey of how you evolve your perspective, how you gently open all of that up again to go, wow, I didn't know that was available. Quite like the look of that. Yeah.
Is there anything more we wanted to say about our programming before we hop in?
Yeah, so in terms of our outdated programming that we carry, it's what's really important for us is to kind of not be afraid of opening the vault, and not be afraid of really observing and being curious around what happened to us. And it's really difficult at the beginning, isn't it? Because and it takes us a while sometimes to really get going on that journey. We kind of start to see it. We start to see lots of synchronicities around the same information that's trying to get our attention. And it takes us a while to go into that, because we fear going back to the wounds. But what I would say to anybody who's just starting on that, and I imagine if people are listening to this masterclass, they've already started on that journey. But there may be some people who are just really starting to get curious. And what I would say to anybody is to stay curious and to become the observer of yourself, to become the observer of your perspective and how you see the world differently to others, and how that limits you, and the beliefs you may carry that give you clues around this as to, well, I can't do that because this happened to me. I can't have that in my life because this is what happened to me. Because this will give you clues as to where that perspective's really started to shut down. And it's totally reversible. It is.
Yeah, the things that I couldn't do, that would be disloyal to my, relationship with my mother, just
Yeah, it's hard. It's very
yeah,
hard.
so an identity of loyalty and then a choice that wasn't really, when once you open up the perspective, disloyal, but felt, like my role is to be, you know this certain way. and
Yeah.
and if you're not this certain way, that's disloyal. So
So then where to start with that is, where did I receive that message? And who did it benefit for me to believe that? Did it benefit me? Is it true? And to start getting just curiosity and observing it. I'm feeling that if I say I don't want to go home for the holidays, that's disloyal, that's going to hurt my mother, whoever. It applies to more than just our mothers. Go into that, get curious, catch yourself, observe yourself in your excuses as well as your patterns and your habits.
and I love that question, is that true? And even, is that true? Was that true? Is that true? Is that true now? Is that true
Now,
in this circumstance? And I know
yeah,
you said, is that true? But that, what I heard when you said that, were all those questions came
yeah,
from you into my thought process. So
yeah,
wanted to name those.
yeah, and getting in touch with our gut. And does that feel like it should be true? Is that just something that I've been taught to believe? It's so getting curious and learning to observe yourself is the first step. It's the first step to starting to look at some of the things that lie beneath the surface in us, that we will completely accept as children and we will carry into adulthood and it's often, I know so many women particularly, and men, but mostly women, who go off to university or that first stage where we leave the home, and we really struggle, because that's when we start to realize just how our experience wasn't the norm for so many other people, and it shakes that the foundation that we had may not have been solid anyway because of our younger experiences, but it shakes all of that. And we struggle at that time in our life to get started because we're not quite sure that we can build on something that doesn't feel stable. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
Yeah. So it's really, yeah, to just start observing in yourself and, ask yourself the question about the gap that you feel that you have had in your life and that you have in your life now, between the life that you've lived and what you've experienced and what you believe it should have been, because that's what tends to come in when we leave the home for the first time and start to kind of share our stories with each other and start to realize that there's a gap there between what I got and what I feel I should have got.
For me, that came much later in life, but yes.
Yeah. 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 But it happens, doesn't it? There's a point when that happens. When we're in a first relationship and we meet the parents of our partner, for example, and we go, oh wow, this is very different to what I experienced. There's many places and points when that can happen, but it's really interesting to notice that gap and get curious about what is normal, because this is another way that we're programmed, of this is normal and that's not normal. But actually, as we get older and older and we have more life experience and we connect with more people, we realize there is no normal.
I love that. I had a friend whose dad used to say the only normal people are the people you don't know that well.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know one of the most healing things that happened to me? I part of my work life, I was a wedding photographer. And it was kind of a thing I fell into. It was definitely life pushing me in a direction to learn something. And shooting hundreds of, well, not hundreds, but a few hundred weddings, and being very up close with the bride and the mother and the groom and their mother, and seeing all of the family dynamics that take place. It was really healing to me, because I'd gone through that first part of my life just really feeling very sorry for myself on how much I felt I'd been shortchanged from what should have been normal. But actually having this job that was very intimate on a kind of a high pressured part of many, being in that kind of circle as the observer, made me realize that, there is no normal, and we've all got our stuff, all of us, every family. Some of us are better at hiding it than others. So it's really helpful for us to just get curious about what we feel happened to us. And then further on in the journey, that's when we're able to depersonalize a lot of that. Because what harms us most is the beliefs that we start to take on about us, about who we are, and how we're wrong, and how we're bad, and how we don't deserve, and how we should shrink and stay small, and how, there's something wrong with us, otherwise that wouldn't have happened to us. We, in some level, when we have the mother wound, we carry some of that, and we're not always aware of it. So be the observer of where that comes up, where those feelings come up in us, and get curious as to where the origin story for all of that was. So the way I do it with my clients is we do this work in hypnosis. So it's really quick and powerful, because we can ask a question and go straight into it. But it can still be done as a self-healer. There are ways that we can track the history of a belief. And a belief is a thought that's had an emotion attached to it, that's attached to a strong experience. And to track when that happened within us and bring it to now, so that we can look at it and go, well, is that true for me now? Was it even true then? Or was it misunderstanding, misinterpretation? Or was it what I had to believe at that moment in time to get through it, to get to the other side?
Such important questions. And Kate, I'll just pause here for a moment and invite folks listening right now to just notice all the information we just received from Kate. What's feeling really important? Is there a question you want to write down for yourself? I mean, for me, when I heard the many layers of, is that true? That feels really important. What feels important to you right now? And of course, you can pause it to think on it longer, but I just want to take a moment to just integrate. You shared so much, and I just wanted us to not lose it. So thank you for that. And from there, maybe what's next is the conscious.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about what's under the surface.
Yeah.
And what's under the surface is very past orientated.
Yeah.
So although we add to what's there, it's very unusual as an adult to add something brand new. Because
interesting.
Yeah, because the conscious mind can spot things and make a decision about whether we let them in a way that it can't when we're a child, because the conscious thinking mind doesn't even start developing till we're 12 years old. So that's when it starts. It's not
There's no stop sign to say no thank you, I'm not going to take that in at all. It's all coming in.
It's in sponge. It's in. So that doesn't start till we're about 12, doesn't finish till we're around 25. So we think we're an adult at 18. Oh no, we're not. We're really not. We're still very much developing. So that kind of gatekeeper part of the mind develops last, which is a shame. It would save us a lot of pain if that started earlier. But what the priority is for the mind is to kind of orient to the environment early on. So that's why it happens in the way that it happens. And they are the older parts of the mind. You know, when we were in tribal societies, and you know, if the bush was rustling, it could be a tiger in there. You know, so it was based on survival that the unconscious parts came first. But unfortunately, that gatekeeper, it comes when a lot of that stuff's being absorbed already. It's already in there. So that's why it's unusual for new information to go into the subconscious mind unless we've let it through the gate
On purpose.
on purpose. But things will come through if they have a foundation already there, and they'll build upon them.
That makes sense.
It seems confirmation.
Cycle, like, oh, I recognize that. That's reinforcing what I already believe, so you can grow what you believe into different.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
And now we're an adult, so you're seeing confirmation bias everywhere from what we already believe, based upon something that came in way before we knew any different. So the unconscious mind and subconscious is overwhelmingly past orientated, but the conscious thinking mind, the level 3 of mind, is here and now in the present. So it's our thoughts right now, it's our decisions, our analysis, our thoughtful responses, our choices. And we may ask, well, if all of this stuff happened in the past, how can we consciously change it now in the present? So this again goes back to that learning to be the observer of your own behavior, learning to be an observer of the patterns that are happening in your life, because these are all indicators of what went in before. Really paying attention to your body. Your body will let you know so much of what's going on in your unconscious and your subconscious. I mean, we talked about right at the beginning about the unconscious mind and about how it connects to it runs the limbic system, which is the fight and the flight response, and the freeze and the fawn and the flop and all of that. It runs all of our hormones because it's in charge of injecting in the adrenaline to run, to escape the flight response, all the cortisol. It's will dial us right down to take all our energy away from us so that we freeze and flop to keep ourselves safe. So many of us who have had a stressful early start to life, we will carry chronic patterns in our body, which may become medical diagnoses of chronic illness related to chronic stress response. So, you know, kind of, I see a lot, I've experienced myself, and I've seen a lot of chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, had both of those for more than a decade.
Oh, can I pause you and say you don't have fibromyalgia?
No.
That's
yeah.
fantastic.
So I was medicated for that for over 13 years, and everything gone. Insomnia, 20 years of insomnia, migraines, chronic migraines, hormonal issues. When you look at what's happening with the limbic system, with the kind of like the switches that get switched on and off in the body in our stress responses, and then you look at what that actually does hormonally in the body, and then you compare that to these chronic illnesses, it's science isn't really definitely telling us chronic stress responses are causing these diseases and these illnesses, but it's anecdotally, from what we see and our shared experiences, it's telling us that it's highly likely.
I'm really thinking into what you just said about fibromyalgia, because I'm thinking about the clients that I work with, that and my population, I'm talking about I'm not talking about a 1 million person population, but there's a pattern between having in this particular, again, small population, a narcissistic parent and fibromyalgia. And so as you're saying that, I'm like, whoa, that's
100%.
Wild.
Yeah, yeah. I
But
actually
of course,
started.
that's not a that's not a medical diagnosis on my part, but
No.
it's just a small observation, and I'm just blown away by, and
Yeah.
also just that's so hopeful that you were able to heal yourself. So yay.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I had a Facebook group years ago when I was starting. I was very lucky when I got my diagnosis, and that the rheumatologist that diagnosed me said, whatever you do, don't go to the support groups because you'll never get better. And what I took from that was, yeah, I thought it was a really shocking thing to say. But what I took from that is, one, wow, I can get better. And two, there's a mental game involved in this. And that was kind of like the first step for me in trying to
mm,
figure a lot of this stuff out. I also used to notice and started to track when I had my flares. And without fail, I would have a flare as a family event was coming up. Just trying to
hmm.
get me out. My body was trying to get me out of things I didn't want to do, places I didn't want to be, and to check out of life. When things got really tough and stressful emotionally, I could go to bed for 2 days.
Wow. Body's so wise.
Yeah.
It's like
Exactly.
trying to communicate to us without the words, because it doesn't,
Yeah.
since that part of the brain doesn't speak words, it's like, I'm trying to get your attention here.
It's trying to keep us safe. Trying to keep us safe. And if it has to give us disease and illness to keep us safe, it will do what it takes. It's very powerful, very powerful.
And at the same time, if you're listening to this and you have an illness that is medical, there that can also be. And so
Yeah.
I I don't want to add any layer of pain or shame to anyone who, if you are fortunate and it is something that can be healed through your healing journey, that's
Yeah.
incredible. And if your biology is what it is that it cannot, that doesn't mean you're doing your healing wrong in any way. It just, so I just want to name that, because not every, I love that worked for you, and that's hopeful for so many, and also for those that their biology, that's not going to work. That's not your fault. And
Absolutely. I mean, at best, you could take from this a curiosity as to, are there any changes I can make in my life to make things easier for me, to make things easier on my body,
yeah.
and see what happens. It's not going to be the same for everybody. It's not, because epigenetics is a thing, isn't it? So but for me, I had many chronic issues that were based upon emotional baggage, pain, unresolved trauma.
So let's continue on of how to expand our perspective
Yeah.
so that we can learn. And I just want to name that while we're going to continue to receive tools and learning how to expand our perspective in this talk, if you're hearing Kate speak and you want to learn more, there will be links on the speaker page at remothering.org for how you can connect with Kate. She's the energy gardener at her website and on Instagram. But I just want to make sure, because you do work with one-on-one with clients who
I do.
and you do the hypnotherapy and the intuitive energy healing together.
Yeah, to go through this process, really, we the sessions go through the 4 levels of the mind to change the way you look at a problem in your life, because when you change the way you look at the problem changes, doesn't it? Yeah, it's really powerful.
So yeah, so I wanted to continue along, but I also, if someone's listening and they're hearing, that I also want them to know that they can do this work with you directly. So